Welcome to Incentives Matter, your guide to what's new in behavioral science and behavioral economics. Let's see what's really driving decisions.
It's a phrase commonly heard. It depends. Often it's presented as a sign of wisdom, of nuance, of resisting oversimplification. But what if that seemingly innocuous statement, that inclination towards the middle ground, is actually a significant behavioral barrier, even a threat to collective progress and, perhaps, democracy itself?
The research suggests it's not just benign fence-sitting. When a significant portion of a population defaults to this lukewarm middle, it can create a vacuum, ceding influence to more extreme voices and paralyzing effective action. It's a form of behavioral inertia masquerading as moderation.
So it's not just about indecision on a personal level, but about how that collective hesitation impacts the very fabric of how societies make decisions and move forward?
Precisely. It's about the systemic consequences of individual cognitive defaults and how they interact to shape public discourse and policy outcomes. The danger isn't the thoughtful, evidence-based "it depends," but the one born of discomfort, risk aversion, or an incomplete understanding that prevents any position from coalescing into actionable will.
So regarding this lukewarm middle more, is it a specific demographic, a mindset? How do behavioral scientists define this state of being beyond just a lack of strong opinion?
It's less about a demographic and more about a cognitive posture. From a behavioral perspective, the lukewarm middle often represents a state of high ambiguity aversion or a default to inaction. Individuals in this space might perceive a high cost associated with taking a firm stance, whether that cost is social, like potential conflict or disapproval, or cognitive, the effort required to deeply analyze complex issues and form a robust opinion. It's not necessarily apathy, but a form of behavioral paralysis, often fueled by a desire to avoid being wrong or to maintain perceived neutrality.
So it's not about being truly neutral, but perhaps appearing neutral or delaying a decision indefinitely.
Exactly. It can manifest as genuine indecision, but also as a strategic avoidance of commitment. Think of it like a consumer facing an overwhelming array of choices for a complex product, say a new financial investment. Rather than picking an option that might be suboptimal or committing to a path with uncertain returns, they might just defer the purchase or investment altogether, believing they need more information. In a social or political context, this deferral means no action is taken, no clear mandate emerges, and the problem space remains open, often deteriorating.
That brings us to "it depends." Individuals often praise nuance, the ability to see multiple sides. Where does the line blur between genuine thoughtfulness and this problematic default? What are the cognitive mechanisms behind constantly saying, "it depends"?
The phrase "it depends" can indeed signal a sophisticated understanding of complexity. However, its problematic manifestation often stems from a few key cognitive biases. One is ambiguity aversion, a preference for known risks over unknown risks. When faced with complex issues where outcomes are uncertain and there are no clear right answers, people might retreat to "it depends," rather than committing to a path with unclear consequences. Another factor is cognitive load. Forming a firm opinion on a multifaceted issue, especially one with conflicting data or moral dimensions, requires significant mental effort, what Daniel Kahneman would call System 2 thinking. Saying "it depends" is often a System 1 heuristic, a quick, low-effort response that sidesteps the hard work of synthesizing conflicting information and weighing trade-offs.
So it's a mental shortcut almost? A way to manage complexity without truly engaging with it?
In many cases, yes, it provides a temporary intellectual escape hatch. It allows individuals to acknowledge complexity without having to resolve it within their own framework of beliefs or priorities. This is distinct from, say, a scientist presenting a nuanced finding with carefully articulated caveats and confidence intervals, which is about precision. This "it depends" is often about avoiding the discomfort of a firm commitment, especially when the personal stakes feel high, like aligning with a potentially unpopular viewpoint or making a choice that might be criticized. It's a way to remain uncommitted and thus unassailable.
And this isn't necessarily about lacking intelligence, but rather a universal human tendency to conserve cognitive energy or avoid discomfort.
Absolutely. It's a very human response to an increasingly complex world where definitive answers are rare and information overload is constant. The brain seeks efficiency, and it depends offers a form of psychological efficiency, even if it comes at a societal cost. It's a form of self-preservation that, when aggregated across a large population, can lead to collective stagnation.
Many people probably see the middle ground as the safest, most rational place to be. It's where compromise happens, where extremes are avoided. Is there a behavioral science lens that explains why people feel safer there, even when it might be detrimental?
There's a strong pull towards perceived safety in the middle, and several biases contribute to this. One element is social desirability bias. People often want to be seen as reasonable, balanced, and open-minded. Taking an extreme or firm stance can invite criticism or alienate others, potentially leading to social costs. The middle ground feels like a neutral zone, less prone to social sanctions, and often evokes perceptions of maturity or wisdom. Then there's loss aversion. Committing to a position means potentially losing the benefits of alternative positions, or, more acutely, losing social standing if that position proves unpopular or incorrect. The lukewarm middle allows individuals to defer this potential loss, keeping all options theoretically open and avoiding the discomfort of commitment.
And this isn't necessarily about personal comfort, but also about maintaining a certain social standing or avoiding conflict within one's social circles.
Precisely. In an increasingly polarized environment, explicitly aligning with one side or another can be socially costly, leading to ostracization or heated arguments. The middle offers a temporary refuge from that pressure. It also plays into the false consensus effect, where individuals might overestimate how many others share their ambiguous stance, making it feel even safer. They might believe that if they are unsure, many others must be too, thereby normalizing the indecision and reinforcing the idea that it's a widely held acceptable position.
And how does this illusion of safety intersect with the idea of being wise or nuanced, as mentioned earlier?
It reinforces it significantly. The person who readily says, "it depends," can be perceived, at least by themselves and sometimes by others, as the wise, thoughtful individual who understands the complexity others miss, or who possesses a superior intellect capable of seeing all sides. This perception acts as a powerful positive reinforcement, making it even harder to shift away from that default. It's a self-serving bias that justifies inaction or indecision as a virtue, rather than recognizing it as a potential impediment. It becomes a badge of intellectual superiority, rather than a symptom of behavioral paralysis.
This seems to have significant implications for collective action. If everyone is waiting in the lukewarm middle for a clearer signal or for someone else to act, how does anything ever get done?
This is where the individual cognitive default scales up to a profound societal problem. It creates a classic collective action problem and a significant diffusion of responsibility. When there's no clear consensus or vocal advocacy from a broad base, individuals might assume that someone else will step up, or that the problem isn't urgent enough to warrant their personal commitment. This is the free rider problem applied to civic engagement. If enough people believe their individual voice won't make a difference, or that taking a stance is someone else's job, then the collective will to act evaporates. The potential for progress is lost in a sea of passive observation.
So the lukewarm middle isn't just inert, it actively prevents positive momentum.
It can, fundamentally. Think of it like trying to push a heavy object across a room. If everyone is just mildly leaning on it, saying, well, it depends on how many others are pushing and how hard, the object doesn't move. But if even a smaller, more committed group decides to push decisively in one direction, they can generate momentum. The lukewarm middle often creates a critical mass of inaction. Without a clear signal from a substantial, engaged segment of the population, leaders lack a mandate and initiatives stall. This is particularly salient in issues requiring broad societal shifts, like addressing climate change, implementing public health measures, or enacting significant economic reforms, where widespread, if not universal, buy-in is essential.
So it's not the active opposition that's the primary blocker in some cases, but the passive lack of support?
Precisely. Active opposition, while challenging, at least defines the boundaries of the debate and provides a clear counterpoint. This allows for negotiation, compromise, or a clear decision to be made through established processes. The lukewarm middle, however, leaves the boundaries undefined, creating a morass where no clear direction can be established, and even well-intentioned initiatives struggle to gain the traction needed for implementation. It's a silent veto by inaction. This is counterintuitive. Individuals often associate the middle with moderating extremes, but the title suggests the lukewarm middle is a threat to democracy, potentially exacerbating polarization. How does that happen from a behavioral perspective? It's a paradox, and a crucial one for understanding contemporary political dynamics. When the broad middle defaults to "it depends" or inaction, they effectively cede the conversational space, and often the policymaking space, to those with the strongest, most unequivocal, and often most extreme voices. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does public discourse. If the middle isn't articulating a nuanced yet firm position, then the most passionate, albeit sometimes less representative, voices become the loudest and most influential. This can create an illusion of polarization, even if the majority of people hold more moderate but unexpressed views.
So the problem isn't necessarily that people are polarized, but that the moderate voices are silent, creating the perception of a deeply divided populace.
Exactly. This leads to what's sometimes called the spiral of silence effect. If individuals perceive that their moderate views are not shared, or that expressing them will lead to social isolation or conflict, they become less likely to voice them. This makes the vocal extremes seem even more dominant, pushing more people into silence or the lukewarm middle, further amplifying the perceived polarization. It becomes a self-reinforcing cycle, where the absence of a vocal middle makes the extremes appear even more defining of the entire spectrum.
And this is exacerbated by how media, particularly social media, often amplifies extreme voices, right?
Absolutely. Social media algorithms are often optimized for engagement, and strong, clear, often provocative stances tend to generate more engagement, more likes, shares, and comments than nuanced, middle-of-the-road positions. This creates an echo chamber effect for extreme views, making the silent majority of the lukewarm middle feel even more isolated and hesitant to speak up. The incentives in a digitally driven public square are often misaligned for moderation and thoughtful deliberation, inadvertently rewarding certainty and intensity over complexity.
The discussion has touched on this, but it is important to really hone in on the tangible costs. What are the real-world consequences when a significant portion of a population defaults to this "it depends" and stays in the lukewarm middle?
The costs are substantial and multifaceted, impacting every aspect of collective life. First, there's the pervasive opportunity cost, the critical policies not enacted, the pressing problems not addressed, the vital progress not made. This is particularly critical for issues with long-term consequences, like climate change mitigation, addressing systemic economic inequality, or updating decaying infrastructure. If consensus can't be forged due to widespread indecision and a lack of committed advocacy, these problems fester and often become more intractable and exponentially costly to solve later. It's the cost of what could have been done, but wasn't.
So it's not just a stagnant state, but one that actively allows negative externalities to accumulate.
Precisely. Secondly, there's the erosion of trust in institutions and processes. When governments, organizations, or even scientific bodies appear gridlocked, unable to make decisive progress on critical issues, public trust in their efficacy and legitimacy diminishes. This fuels cynicism and further disengagement, reinforcing the very lukewarm middle behavior we're discussing. People stop believing that their engagement matters, or that the system itself is capable of delivering solutions, which then reduces the incentive to engage even further.
And this could even lead to a hollowing out of democratic processes themselves if engagement falls too low.
It certainly can.
If the middle is consistently disengaged and unwilling to take clear stands, it effectively empowers minority factions with strong, unambiguous agendas to steer the ship. Democracy relies on robust, active participation and a willingness to negotiate and compromise from a position of informed conviction, not passive indecision. When the middle is silent, the system loses its self-correcting mechanisms. It becomes vulnerable to capture by well-organized, highly motivated groups, regardless of their broad popular support. The lukewarm middle isn't a neutral force. It's a force that, through its inertia, allows other, often more extreme, forces to dominate and dictate outcomes.
This has been a really thought-provoking discussion. It challenges how many individuals instinctively approach complex issues. So, as the conversation wraps up, what are the key insights listeners should take away from understanding the dangers of this lukewarm middle and the it depends default?
Several key insights emerge from this behavioral perspective. First, inaction is a decision with consequences. It's not a neutral stance, especially in collective contexts. It has observable and often detrimental effects on progress and societal well-being. Second, the cognitive roots of it depends are often about discomfort avoidance and managing cognitive load, not always genuine intellectual humility. It's a behavioral heuristic that, while personally convenient, can lead to systemic paralysis.
So, being aware of those cognitive shortcuts is crucial.
Absolutely. And third, and perhaps most critically, the lukewarm middle doesn't inherently moderate extremes. It often enables them. By creating a vacuum in public discourse and policymaking, it allows the loudest and most certain voices, often from the polls, to dominate. This can lead to perceived and actual polarization, undermining the very consensus building and stability it might ostensibly represent.
That's a powerful point. The very thing individuals might think is helping to bring people together or find compromise might actually be tearing them apart, or at least preventing real solutions from emerging.
Indeed, it forces a reconsideration of the value of indecision and the perception of neutrality. It prompts individuals to question whether a desire for perceived balance is leading to progress or, in fact, fostering paralysis.
So, for listeners, the practical implication is to be more critical of personal "it depends" and to recognize the societal cost of widespread indecision.
Exactly. The question for individuals then becomes, when is it depends a sign of thoughtful analysis and genuine nuance, and when is it a behavioral shortcut enabling inaction that ultimately harms the collective?
And how do individuals and society move from a default of "it depends" to a more engaged and constructive approach, even when faced with immense complexity? That's a significant challenge. That's all for this episode of Incentives Matter. Join us next time as we keep unpacking what really drives decisions. Thanks for listening.
Choose wisely, or at least know why you didn't.